So here we are in the heart of Edinburgh on a very, very wet Sunday morning. We've had a bit of thunder and lightning, so ironically, David Hume, are you listening? Maybe God or the gods are conspiring against us today. But we're standing with a backdrop of part of Edinburgh University, and behind me we have the David Hume Tower. And it is believed that David Hume first attended the university here aged 12. Possibly some historical records believe he might even have been younger, as young as 10 years of age. As a student, things were okay, but later on in life, David Hume was to apply to become the chair of moral philosophy, amongst other posts, but the town council refused him on the grounds that they couldn't have an atheist in that position. So here we are in the heart of Edinburgh's historic Old Town. We're standing not very far from the world-renowned Edinburgh Castle. And across the road, next to the National Trust Gladstone Hall, we have a series of buildings in which the great David Hume was believed to have been born in the year 1711. Hume, during his time in Edinburgh, moved around rather a lot, and we've now moved to one of his other residences here in Widows Court in the heart of Edinburgh's Old Town. Having travelled extensively in Europe and in his mind, eventually David Hume was to settle for many years at this apartment here in the Old Town of Edinburgh. We're in James Court, and it's here that Hume and his sister were to enjoy many years living together. So we're now looking with a backdrop of St Giles Cathedral at the statue of David Hume. Although it looks to be a very ancient statue, it was only actually commissioned in the year 1997. And here we have David Hume attired in classic Greek garb, perhaps looking like one of the great Grecian philosophers, a Socrates or an Aristotle. And you can notice that Hume is carrying a tablet of stone in his right hand. If you could see more closely, there is no inscription upon the tablet, because this tablet is supposed to represent the Ten Commandments. But Hume, widely regarded as being an atheist, would take commandments from no man. If you were to touch the big toe on the right foot of David Hume, as many of Edinburgh students do, you would be granted eternal wisdom, or so the old saying goes. I have touched and rubbed the big toe on David Hume's right foot 792 times, and I'm still glaik it. But if you ever come to Edinburgh, try it, it might just work for you. Having been rejected for the post of Professor of Logic, which the previous incumbent of which had been one Adam Smith, David Hume turned his attention to the Signet Library here by Parliament Square in Old Edinburgh. And here he was appointed the Chief Librarian, and he had the post from the year 1752 to 1757. That crucially, it gave him the opportunity to research one of his greatest works, the history of England. Of course, this was the book that was to enable him to rise to fame and make some serious money. With the prestigious backdrop of what we refer to as Princes Street Gardens here in Edinburgh, overlooking the so-called New Town, I now come to tell you the fabulous tale involving David Hume and a couple of fishwives. David Hume was gazing across what was referred to as the North Lake, or what we would call parochially the Nor Loch, because you see, where we're standing now was once a huge sea of water, a man-made loch, and he was gazing across to view the construction of his Newtown house at 1 St David Street. As he was viewing across, the silly old buffer managed to slip and he fell into the Nor Loch, a loch incidentally filled with eels, sewage and goodness only knows what else. The poor man screamed out, help me, I'm a drowning man." And luckily for him, two fishwives, women that gutted or chopped up fish were nearby and rushed to his aid. But when they saw who he was, they turned their backs on him and they walked away. Hume couldn't believe what he was seeing, and he screamed out, "Women, women, come back! Can't you see I'm a drowning man? Help me!" By this time, he was sinking fast. He was desperate for help. And the fisherwomen returned and they said, "But sir, we cannot help you. We know who you are. You're David Hume. You're a heathen, an atheist. You're not a man of God. Unless you agree to become a Christian gentleman and recite the Lord's Prayer, then we're afraid you are a doomed man." There has never been a quicker conversion to Christianity than took place that day, and Hume was heard to shout out the Lord's Prayer verbatim. The wonderful, incredible tale of David Hume on the banks of the Norloch. As you know, David Hume had lived at several residences in the old town of Edinburgh, but the old town was ridden with poverty, with disease and with crime. So Hume understandably was craving to leave for the new town of Edinburgh, which began to evolve with its neoclassical Georgian architecture in the year 1767. The very year that Hume was to come and live here and stayed residing here until his death in 1776. He lived in St David Street, which is just behind me. Currently I'm standing several hundred feet up at the top of the Walter Scott Monument, so I daren't move for fear of falling over. But trust me, dear students, David Hume lived in St David Street, just down there. David Hume allegedly had a fiancée, the impish Nancy Ord, and one evening upon leaving his residence, Nancy was believed to have scribed in chalk St David Street by his residence. It was a form of joke, but the joke stood and the name St David Street remained. David Hume was to die in the year 1776, and he was buried right behind me here in the Colton Cemetery at the Hume Mausoleum. Now, I mentioned that he died in the year 1776, a very famous year for many reasons, not least the year that America was to gain its independence. But it was also the year that David Hume's great friend Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. How appropriate then, how apposite that it should be Adam Smith that wrote the following epitaph and tribute to his great friend David Hume, and I quote, "Upon the whole, I've always considered him, both in his lifetime and since his death, as approaching nearly to the idea of a perfectly wise and virtuous man, as perhaps the nature of human frailty will permit."